Hello, thank you. I'm Smylers. This is a talk about interfaces. I don't mean user interfaces, I don't even mean APIs as in wire protocols, but code interfaces, generally modules, functions, libraries, classes. You've written a bit of code which is intended to be, I don't know if you've ever done this before, but reused. Have you heard of that concept? And this might be a module put in Cpan or something internally for work. And no matter how good the functionality is, if it's got a lousy interface on it, it pretty much hurts all users every time you use it. So here are some examples of things that have been annoying me lately, and I thought if I share them with you, then you can be annoyed as well. And who doesn't want to come to a conference coming out annoyed? As it happens, my first example is because somebody asked me to help them with some PHP lately, but the principle would apply to other languages as well. That's the PHP function for creating a directory. You can probably guess where they've got the name from. That's fine, that all works. Or there's an optional argument. Some people will be able to make a good guess as to what that number at the end means, but it's optional. If you're not into whatever that means, you don't need to include it. That's fine. But actually, there's more than one optional argument. Anyone like to guess what that true at the end is for? Any guesses to where it is? Okay, it's the same as on the command line, the -p flag. So you may notice I've never uploaded year and month in there, so it will create as many nested subdirectories recursively as you need. Which, it's not great that it's just true, because that's quite obscure when reading the code, particularly if you have multiple of them. But, the point is, they're both optional, and I've got a beginner programmer had encountered this. He needed to recursively create all of the subdirectories of the year and the month. He's never heard of Unix file mode permissions, or indeed octal. And suddenly, in order to get the true value in there to say do this recursively, he's also going to stick an octal number in the middle. And even though he doesn't know about them, he has to put in the one that is the default. If you don't have them in there at all, it will assume 0777. But to stick the true at the end, you've got to stick something in the middle there, and it has to be the right thing. So when I say he doesn't know about Unix file permissions or octal, well, he didn't. That is user hostile. If you are, sorry, that's the docs for it there. Oh, what's even better is it's either got path name, the mode, it says it's optional, it goes in. But also under the mode, note mode is ignored on Windows. Which means if you're doing this on Windows and want to recursively create directories, you've got to pass in a parameter which PHP documentation says is going to ignore it. So that's one of the things to avoid. If you've got options, named arguments is good for options. You can recommend those. It avoids this problem where you can have any of the subset of the options, and it avoids what's that true for by putting names on them. And like in datetime, which is full of named arguments. For example, here we're using the constructor called from epoch to create an epoch, and because if you were calling something called from epoch and you just put a number in there, that might be a bit ambiguous as to what that number. Hang on, no. So named arguments are good, but that doesn't mean you should unthinkingly just use them everywhere. If you're passing in a single argument that is an integer to a constructor that's called from epoch, we can work out that it's an epoch without having to write it twice. If the constructor is called new, if you wanted the generic constructor that is constructed different ways, by all means have epoch in as the named argument there. But don't unthinkingly do it everywhere. This particular case has been fixed by datetime moonpig by Mark Jason Anonymous and Ricardo Signe. But the general thing there is, many cases where named arguments improve things, but don't make your users type things just for the sake of it. Okay, another example now with arguments. This is a module which tests whether the calculated value is approximately the expected value within a certain tolerance. And that's alright on that slide. It perhaps doesn't look what the problem is. Maybe if I make it a bit more realistic as to how it would look in my editor. There, okay, that's smaller, but we've still got that line in the middle, is approximum, widget calculate, expected value, we've got description there, and that 0.2 that's the tolerance is somewhere over here, off the screen. What we've got in this case is we've got a really useful argument that is actually the crux of what that function line is doing at the end of a description string which is arbitrarily long and indeed hidden by it. So this is the case where it's just the order of the arguments can make your code interface is awkward. Because if you see a long description scrolling off the right of the window, you don't think, oh, let's check at the end of it just in case there's a useful number there. There's a few of these modules that test things within a tolerance. Test number delta is another one. That gets this right. So we can have the calculated value, the expected value, then the tolerance, and then the long string. And if the string disappears off the edge of your screen, that's fine, we can cope with that, it's just the output. So well done, test number delta getting right, except there's also, oh, now suppose you've got a bunch of tests you're doing, and you decide this is one tolerance value we're going to use for our one of them. That's a good idea. So we can specify that when we're loading the module, and we don't have to spec it here. Anybody feel uneasy about that? Oh, only one person. Okay. Well, for the rest of you, go on. What is it?
Well, you've changed the shape of the function now.
Yeah, we've got an optional argument that's in the middle. So we've avoided the PHP thing of having to specify 0777. You know, for fun, if you do encounter a PHP Windows programmer that's encountering that, rather than 0777, give them the decimal equivalent, and then it looks an even more random number in the middle that's the magic thing. But yeah, so now it's doing something different based on that, and I'm like, what if this description was numeric? Would that work?
What happens if somebody puts another use line halfway down the code to change the delta?
Exactly. We've also got that one. So the first problem with the optional middle arguments of kind of a nothing in the middle there, but also a global value of the use line, you can probably get away with it in a .t script, but it's not great elsewhere. What do you really want if you've got a bit of state like that? An object. Object-oriented programming, that's good, isn't it? So that would be a better thing here. You could have a constructor you could pass the 0.22 and call methods on things. So let's have a look at some object-oriented code. Here's an object. You can tell it's object-oriented because there's a method for that. In particular, it's a class method. It's actually not doing anything except making me repeat the class name, which is particularly good if you're trying to do one line on the command line. You can type in all this button there, and look, it's if JavaScript's 2 words, it's a 4-word class name as well. At least you didn't write anonymous in full. We can be grateful for that. But just to don't provide a nice for that I should say at this point that the reason I'm criticising the interfaces of these modules is because the modules themselves are useful, and I appreciate them, and thank you to the people who wrote them. And I'm generally not mentioning their names, because to be worth including in this talk, it had to be not just that module does something incredibly stupid and baroque. It was, here is a common thing which crops up several times over. So please don't feel bad if you've been involved in one of the modules listed here, and don't go around pitchforking those who have. This is just things we're all going to try not to. Because if people hadn't made these mistakes, we wouldn't have learned a note one. So this is not a criticism. I like that this module exists. But really, the class methods, for no reason, you're just making me do lots of typing, that could so easily just be a function. And that's the case for most class methods that aren't constructors, usually. Factories, something like that, with those. So, if we're going to have object orientation, let's have objects. Here's something that's got an object in it. So, we use the module, and we know we've got an object because we've invoked new on it. We've got an object at that point there. At which point, having got the new object, well, I'm going to call the parse method on it and pass it some EXIF data from a camera photograph, and that will convert it into a datetime object and return that. The only problem is, at this point here, as soon as we get the new object, the only thing we're doing is with people in the middle, like next to a gap, like to shuffle along, because I'm worried about the buttocks of all these people on the stairs. They're going to be terribly uncomfortable there. I don't want to be giving a talk where I'm not concentrating on the slides, but worrying about the audience's buttocks. There's no state there. We call new, no options, so all of our objects always be the same, and you might think, oh, maybe sometimes they are different. So I actually looked at the source for this one. This is the entire source of the new method, of that module there. It goes to a lot of effort to make sure that it is blessing exactly nothing into a very particular class. And the parse method that we call on you, well, here's the start of it. It goes up, I'm being called an object. Let's get what that object is and store it in $self. That and that are the only uses of $self in the entire file. So the object orientation is often useful, but don't just use it regardless. Some things are better as a simple function. There is a workaround if you find these stateless objects. Aaron Crane, who's currently giving a talk by coincidence in the main lecture theatre at the moment, has published Object Disoriented, and that's the name of an overly object-oriented module. Say which method you want, and it will turn it into a function, and you can just call it as a function. That doesn't excuse the original design, of course, and it's not ideal because we now do a function just called parse, and it probably should be called parse exif type, something like that, when it doesn't have the class name before it. So that is something in your toolkit you can do to get you out of some annoyance if you encounter one of these. So if we're having some objects, they should have state. That's what we want there, and here's one that does. This is the old original interface to this module, but we call the constructor and we pass in it an integer, and that gives us an object which we can then call the method GetStringOn, and it will spell it out in English words. So you pass it in an integer 4 and you get FOUR out as a string. And that's useful. That seems like a reasonable use of an object. Except that it turns out the only thing you can do with one of those objects is call getStringOn. There are no other methods provided. And you think, well, that's optional, that'd be something you wouldn't want to. But also, there'd be no point constructing it if you weren't going to do that. So we've got two parts here, split into two, for no reason. Everybody who does the first part is going to do the second part, in which case, just combine the operations together, at which point you don't even need an object, you just need a function, which you give it a number to, and you get some words out. Which, actually, is what Lingua numbers does now. And thank you to Neil Bowers, who was speaking before me, and indeed after me. I'm in there sort of a Neil Bowers sandwich here, who is taking over maintenance of that module. And that's what's the kind of thing that you would want there. But that's, you know, even if you have state, think whether the state is useful or whether it can just be encapsulated in a single call that does everything people want. It's just boilerplate to make people do one step and you always do another step afterwards. And if you find little recipes or what's the jargon word, like design patterns going around, that probably suggests there's something in the interface that's wrong, where we should be able to combine things and not need so boilerplate. Right, on another topic. This was something I was recently doing on Windows. I wanted to execute a command with a hidden window, and it turns out that's what lets me do it. That was working fine, except I forgot to check for errors. And one day I'd failed on a Mr. Symlink out and went and tried mapping, and the command wasn't there, and it wasn't failing at that point. So, oops, that's my mistake. That's not an interface thing. Let me fix that. Put or die on there, and it then did. I checked. Die at that point. Unfortunately, the error message was empty. It wasn't setting that. So, oh well, it's Windows. I vaguely remember hearing somewhere that on Windows it has its own special variable. Although on checking, that should only be set if the other one is, but I just tried, no, that was still empty. Okay, I have to read the documentation. Hate it when that happens. But right, okay, that's fine. And it's global state, but then so is $bang. Right. The only trouble with that was, when I then put the symlink back into the path and made the command there, it was still dying. Because it turns out that that run command there returns false even when it succeeds. What we actually have to do is that. So we have to run it, we then have to check to see if that last error has got something in it, and if so, print it out. And of course, we have to save it to a variable because that's global state, and who knows if something has happened in between. And now, our error handling is about twice as long as the original code, which we need to think about your error handling. By the way, on my laptop, these show up in a kind of a red for warning and danger. On the projector, they have a nice friendly orange. I don't know if it's see my T-shirt. I thought, oh, I quite like that. But there is no point in having an interface which is nice and easy to use until you're trying to do error handling, because everybody needs to handle errors all the time. And you might be able to, in your Cpan module, publish a synopsis in which you just like yada yada yada, yeah, plus error handling, that's trivial. Trivial, but tedious if you have to go around putting that after every single call. I don't know, I haven't looked into it, whether it is an actual problem with the Microsoft OLE thing we're using or with the Perl wrap around it. As I said, this isn't about blame, it is just somewhere along there, something in the interface is less helpful than it ought to be. Another example on error handling. Image size, here it's just a function that returns width and height, and if something's gone wrong with reading a file, as well it might, because files are like that, then we die. Oh, except in the case where image size can't find the width and height, it returns undef for each of them. Not it returns a single undef from the function, which is false, but it returns a list of 2 undefs. And a list that isn't empty is true, and therefore we've truthfully got a lack of width and height, and that die never runs. So what you actually have to do, it turns out it returns a 3-part thing, you've got error in there, and again, if error, then we can deal with it. But we've now got a function that returns a list of up to 3 values, but which are never defined at the same time. Either those 2 are defined, and that one doesn't exist, or is undef, haven't checked, or that one's defined and those 2 are both undef. That's just it. Someone's gone, oh, this is a neat way in which I can, inside my code, return different things depending on the scenario. It might be neat for you writing it, but it then is really cumbersome for anyone using it. So when you're designing your interfaces, you need to presume that things will go wrong and think about how you're going to do that instead. Returning undef is acceptable. Dying or throwing catching is also fine. You may think, oh, but what if I die the user or carp or something like that? Oh, they don't want a fatal error, but they can catch it. You can use catch or a val or something. And actually, it's less hassle to use throw and catch to catch exceptions than it is to resort to these sorts of tricks, which you have to learn per module to deal with errors in a kind of an ad hoc way. So you need to consider that as well. Okay. You remember this? I said this was the old interface to this module. Turns out we were using it. 10.5 years went by, and ooh, no, that happened this year, hasn't it? Yeah. So the only thing that's worse than a lousy interface is a lousy interface that you put up with only to find your code breaking because somebody came along and fixed the interface. And this was in a bit of code that literally hadn't changed for a decade. I didn't know we were using it, it was just installed it somewhere else, but okay, there. It was trivial to fix. That wasn't a problem, but it's still like, what's the difference there? And this isn't actually really a complaint about this module game. It is to emphasise why it's so important to make your interfaces user-friendly in the first place. Because the innards of your code are easy to change. If it's all messy and has got duplication and can do with refactoring, you can fix that or keep the interface the same. If it runs really slowly, you can find a better algorithm with the same interface. If it's got security holes in it, you can fix those up. But the interface is the bit that the users interact with. If the interface is lousy, that, well, for whatever reason, whether it's just you were so excited about getting your new functionality and you didn't pause and think about it, or whether it was just laziness on your part, it's easier to put it in, is a misguided step, because it is pushing the awkwardness, the cumbersomeness, the boilerplate onto all of your users every time they use it. And if you try to fix it later and go, oh well, I'll just get it out there for now and then sort it out, this kind of thing's happened. So interfaces hard to change. Fortunately, not actually that hard to get right if you just pause in your excitement and rush to get your new data out there and think about it. I would recommend writing some sample code that uses your not yet written module or library first. And just write it going, I just want to imagine there is a function that does this, or an object that has these properties on it. and try using it. And then make it happen. Because that way round, you've got an interface that is actually useful for users, rather than sitting there going, oh, what might they want, and adding in functions that people don't need, or some of these come from too much flexibility of adding in combinations of options and things that wouldn't occur. So just pause, do that, pause, try using it before it exists, and think about default values, think about optional arguments, think about error handling, think about the data going in, data coming out, and state. Object orientation is often helpful, and there are some examples here where OO would have fixed, but there's other cases where OO is just adding to the boilerplate and the hassle for the users. And we saw the same with named arguments. So there's no one thing which you should just have a policy of. We're always going to write our code in this way. Don't do anything unthinkingly. Just be alert for any boilerplate, repetition, or awkwardness, and think about your interfaces before you inflict them on people. Thank you.